Good evening, and welcome to the Dead Astrologer Society. I am your host, Donna Woodwell. This is episode 5, where we will be talking about the amazing, radical, and revolutionary Nicholas Culpeper, healer, astrologer, herbalist, and amazing human being. So I hope you really enjoy this show tonight because I am looking forward to it. We are here on paramaniaradio.com, the lovely Paramania Radio. So thank you very much for making a space for the Dead Astrologer Society. As I said, I'm your host, Donna Woodwell. You can find me at fourmoonsastrology.com here in Austin, the weirdest little city in Texas. And like our tagline says, the Dead Astrologer Society is where history meets mystery. So every week we have a special guest or a group of guests that are talking about a topic from the vast history and cultural diversity known as astrology. Now, this is the astrology beyond reading your horoscope in magazines. That's a great way to get started in astrology, but astrology is much bigger than you may have realized just from those magazines. So don't ask us what your sign is. That's not what we're talking about. Tonight, we are going to talk about Nicholas Culpeper. He is a 17th century healer who revolutionized medicine and astrology in some ways. And I'm here with these awesome guests tonight. One is William Morris. Will has 2 doctorates. So I just want you to think that he has 2 doctorates. He's been practicing medicine, oriental medicine and herbalism for 33 years, has a book published on pulse diagnosis, and I'll let you he can tell you more about himself through the course of the show. We also have Lisa Allen, who is an astrologer and an herbalist as well, and she can be reached at her website, Astro Herbalist. She's a tarot reader and has a whole bunch of other backgrounds as well. So without further ado, you don't want to hear me, you want to hear these guys in this amazing story. So, Will, tell us about Nicholas Culpeper and get the ball started.
All right. Hi, Donna. Thanks for having us on. Yes, Culpeper was probably one of the most influential herbalists in the history of the medicine. He was born to an aristocratic landowning family back in the time of King John, around 1199, and is when his family began. So they had quite an influential situation there in England, and but his life was filled with a good amount of tragedy. He was born 19 days after his father died, and consequently went with his mother to live with his grandfather, who was a man named William Addersall, and he was a rector of a parish in St. Margaret's at Isfield, Sussex. Now, William Addersall was extremely strict and would actually lock poor William up. Nicholas Culpeper. Rather.
Oh dear!
It was pretty tough, and so the two of them had a pretty adversarial relationship.
Sounds like Harry Potter.
Well, yeah, and then of course. Following in his father's and his father was a rector as well, and following in his father's and grandfather's footsteps, he went into college. But on his way to college, he had fallen in love with a young lady of extremely high means within the British royalty, and apparently it might have been her father may have been actually one of the supporters for William Addersall. But in any regard, they had planned to elope. And on the way to the elopement, her carriage was struck by lightning, and she passed away.
Oh dear!
So Nicholas Culpeper, young Nicholas, had yet another shock. First, he's growing up without his father and under the extremely strict environs of his grandfather, William Addersall, and his bride-to-be passed away, and he had a crisis. And a change of heart, and now he was.
I guess it's hard to believe in God and become a pastor when your father's already dead, and then the woman you're going to get married gets struck by lightning.
I suppose, but he still did. He was extremely Christian in his bent. Matter of fact, one of his colleagues was William Lilly, who wrote the book Christian Astrology, which is the essentially the grandfather of what's called horary astrology, or the practice of calculating a chart for the moment of a question. And yeah, he had some extraordinary contemporaries. Culpeper and William Lilly, of course, has influenced generations of astrologers, and one of my teachers, or several of my teachers, in fact. So, but his influences,
who will be a future subject for this show for sure.
Aha, very good.
Of all the dead astrologers.
Yes, good. He's published some very substantial texts. What he did that was most radical, though, is he took what was the London Dispensatory, and this is a book which is written in Latin, and it contains most of the herbs, and so the only herbs that were being transmitted in England back in this period of the early 1600s was by family lineage, mother to daughter, but a large catalog of the medicinals that were in use at the time, whether by the College of Physicians or by anyone else, was in possession solely of the College of Physicians and was in Latin. Because of his initial religious preparations, young Nicholas was conversant in Latin. And so this became advantageous to him in his studies with his teacher of pharmacy. So young Nicholas was a pharmacist. And there's been a long history of battle between the pharmacists and the physicians in terms of who's going to give out medicinals. And this is true in the East and true in the West. There's this long-standing battle over the lines of professional roles and responsibilities. So Nicholas put himself squarely into that, and with a man named Ledbetter, and so Ledbetter taught him pharmacy and taught him the medicinal agents of the day and how to collect them and use them, because they did them locally, particularly those folks. And in exchange for that knowledge, young Nicholas taught Ledbetter Latin. So, but the Latin experience came in handy for young Nicholas when he translated the London Dispensatory into plain English, rendering the pharmacopoeia of the Royal College of Physicians available to the common public. And this was extremely radical move, and put him out of the graces, of course, from the Royal College. Now, the Royal College is a group that's authorized by the King of England, and at the time there was a very small group of people providing services throughout London, maybe 22 or so. I could be a little bit wrong on that number, but it's a small number of privileged folks capable of providing such services. One of those members was a man named William Harvey, whom some of you may recognize as the person who discovered the heart as the center of the cardiovascular system and circulation in general. And William Harvey is really recognized as one of the significant contributors in the family of medicine, whereas Culpeper may possibly be viewed as a black sheep because he undid the social closure that the Royal College of Physicians were able to maintain upon the public, which would allow them to exclusively provide medicinal agents to that public at elevated costs, and oftentimes in such a way that the general public could not gain access.
Well, this is such a relevant story for today. I mean, when I first read Nicholas Culpeper's story, I was like, that is amazing. To have someone basically say medicine knowledge belongs to the people who need it. You can't lock it up in a small coterie of people and allow them to charge exorbitant fees when everyone needs health care. it's not something that is like a luxury item like a Mercedes or something that you don't really need in the first place. Everyone needs healthcare at some point in time, and to go against the establishment, somewhat by himself and take them on, that's amazing. That took courage.
Took huge courage, and he was very committed. His practice was out on the outskirts of London at the time, and his primary patient population were poor and indigent folks who could not afford to pay for care. And so he was really expressing some of the core ethical principles of Hippocrates. And indeed, Hippocrates had influence upon his thought through the practices of a Greek physician named Galen. His model of care dealt with what are called humors, and this is kind of analyzing the body from the viewpoint of, is it hot, is it cold? For instance, in hypothyroidism, a person's often cold. Is it dry or moist? And from this point of view, herbal medicine is prescribed. And in fact, in contemporary times, we try to look at large population studies to establish efficacy of an agent for care of a condition or person. These principles of hot, cold, moist, dry are still inherent in the Hindu system of Ayurveda and also in the Chinese systems. So,
okay, well, I want to stop you there because I want to get back to all of these things in a lot of detail because I know Lisa has a lot to say about them too. But let's finish up Nicholas's life because I know he was put in jail and died young. So tell us how that happened so we get finish his biography.
Well, what happened is he was jailed because he was accused of witchcraft. And a woman had sought medical care from him, and she went into relatively severe physical decline. And but what was going on is that prior to this, he had served in the armed forces of the Parliament against the king and received a chest wound. So he was weakened physically to begin with. And then upon his medical care of this young lady being inadequate, and her normal course of retribution would have been to go to the College of Physicians, but he was not a member of that college. And furthermore, the king and the college were losing strength in the public eye. So he actually prevailed in that suit and was not accused of witchcraft, which was one of the ways by which non-royally authorized or church-authorized medical care was constructed. So anyone who's practicing outside of those systems was always vulnerable to accusations of witchcraft because that's the most efficient way to eliminate the competition. So, but in any regard, he prevailed in that lawsuit and succeeded to publish other materials such as The English Physician, The English Midwife. His translation of the London Dispensary has been in publication longer than any other book consistently except for that of the Bible.
Wow.
So this is a really phenomenal level of influence a single individual has had upon whole cultures of practice. And of course, those cultures of practice fell into decline here in the U.S. After the 1920s, and really between the 1920s all the way up until David Eisenberg published a study in the 1990s showing that Americans were spending more out of pocket on natural products and complementary and alternative medicine than they were on conventional care, and that's when the White House Commission on Complementary and Alternative Healthcare was convened.
Okay, so, hold that thought. Let's kill off Culpeper first. So how did this happen? He was very young, right?
Yes.
So,
and to kill him off first. Well, God bless Nicholas Culpeper, because we are the Dead Astrologers Society, and Nicholas's dear ghost is likely very pleased that we're keeping his memory alive.
We should have a parade for him on every birthday. We should have a Nicholas Culpeper, like special alarm. When is his birthday? Do you remember?
I have his birthday here somewhere.
Hey, someone on the chat room, look it up for us. We'll find out when it's... What?
He's 1616 is his birth year. And
we're going to have Nicholas Culpeper moment every show on his birthday. But he did die very young. Tell us how that happened.
Well, he basically became ill and passed away. He was an avid smoker. And the combination of the smoking and the gunshot wound took him out.
So if I remember correctly, he was only like 38.
That's right.
Yeah, anyone who's younger than me that passes away is young.
That's right. Well, he achieved a huge amount in the course of his lifetime, and he's born at 6:11 p.m. on the October 18.
Okay, so let's write that down. I'm going to have to have a calendar of dead astrologers by the end of this. We're going to have all their birthdays marked.
Okay, I miscalculated because I'm looking at these strange charts here. He's born in 1616 on October 18th at 11 p.m., which leads me to believe that his chart is as an approximation, which is typical of people born in that era, when oftentimes people did not have their birth time. Of course, it was more common. I mean, it's only been 100 years that we've had really decent clock systems in this country, in particular connected to the railroad systems. Mm-hmm. Our dear departed Nicholas, we're extremely grateful to him for the
so let's talk about those echoes today. I mean, obviously you and Lisa both work in astrology and herbalism. So how he created a formulary, translated it into the English, promoted locally grown alternatives, and then systematically linked them up to planetary influences. So why don't you both explain what that means and talk a little bit about how that fits in with the model of temperament and finding balance and those kinds of things within healthcare. Lisa, you haven't said anything yet, so.
Yeah.
That's okay. I was just looking at Astro Databank and finding Nicholas Culpeper's birthday here recorded as October 28th, 1616 at 12:12 p.m. in Ockley, England.
Yeah, the 2 days, if you're 10 days apart, that's
pretty good for back then.
Well, that's the difference between the calendar system. It's the current modern calendar versus the Julian calendar.
Right. The one I'm reading from is from John Gadbury's handwriting, a copy of his handwritten chart of 1659.
Oh, excuse me. Okay. Yeah, I'm just looking at, and you're probably right, Donna, wherein they're using the current calendar because that's what the program to create the chart was using. So I can see where you're coming from.
Those of you who aren't astrologers in the audience, about 400 years ago, I think it was, the Catholic Church realized that the calculations that we were using to create a calendar were off. They weren't quite taking into account how leap year actually works. And over the course of millennia, the calendar day had drifted out of sync with the spring equinoxes, so the seasons weren't matching up with the calendar anymore. And so the church said, they mandated a new calendar system that put us back into sync with the seasonal patterns. But that means that everyone born before a certain date is about 10 days off from where we are today, but it's kind of a stretch factor. So the farther back in time you go, the more off or less off I will tell you that next week when I look it up. The more out of sync that it gets. So when you are doing astrology charts for people that are born beyond a certain era, you have to be really clear to know whether or not you're dealing with the new calendar or the old calendar, because otherwise the calculations for where the planets will be slightly off.
Mm-hmm.
We have lots of non-astrologers in the audience, so we need to explain such things.
Excellent description.
Yes.
Okay.
So, back to medicine. Back to lovely medicine. So what's the difference between the model of medicine that has to do with humors, what does that even mean, and what you do when you go into the ER that people might be familiar with?
Are you asking Will or me?
Either one of you.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. But before we can
I'll let Will take that.
Okay, before we can get to that, I think we have to look at the worldview that makes this consideration that we're giving here even plausible.
Okay.
And so we have to consider that Nicholas Culpeper was what you call a hermeticist, and that means that he believed in an axiom which is stated as above, so below. And he was also essentially what's called a Trinitarian. And so he saw that the material world, the subject to the plants and our bodies and so forth, was aligned with a heavenly aspect, which had to do with the planetary spheres, and then beyond that was an aspect of consciousness, which had to do with angels, devas, gods, and our personal consciousness. So this is kind of how he's seeing this alignment between planetary force and how that aggregates into a plant. Now, the humor, a humoral view was essentially eliminated, and that means hot, cold, essentially. That's a simple way to put it. Was eliminated in Western thought at the age of the Enlightenment, and it was traded in for a mechanistic view. So in conventional medicine, we're more interested in molecular pathways, manipulating those pathways with single molecular items in the form of a pharmaceutical, whereas the plant basis, of course, is much larger form of influences. So that it was a rather complex view by which Culpeper considered these rulerships of plants and their influence upon the humors. So let's put it this way, if we had an herb such as golden seal, which has bioflavonoids in it that are anti-inflammatory, and we had a cold with green-yellow phlegm, golden seal would be a very appropriate choice. It's opposed to the heat of the green phlegm and inflamed tissues. It will reduce the phlegm and has an effect of drying the tissues out and reducing the inflammation. If we use a conventional medical approach, it will be to identify the microbe that's at fault and isolate a bacterium, let's say, and then identify an antibiotic that will act precisely against that bacterium. With Culpeper's view, the emphasis was oftentimes more, or as much, rather, on the terrain, on strengthening the physical terrain at the same time as opposing the influence of the disease process, and then maybe also selecting a plant that was similar to the part of the body that was being affected from an astrological point of view. For instance, Aries rules the head and Taurus the throat and so forth.
So it's really a different kind of model of medicine. So that instead of thinking of the body as more like a car and, fixing the spark plugs and, banging the dents out into shape, that it's more of a system, more of an organic network, and you're trying to move kind of levels in a fluid way. Is that more or less what you're trying to say?
Sort of, kind of. It is a systemic view, and it's a systemic view that is inclusive not just of the individual, but their environment, but also the cosmological features of where they exist and the conscious features in which they exist. So a person who has heat may have and dryness will have, to the touch, the skin may feel hot and dry. Their tongue will look red. Their urine may be concentrated in dark yellow and have smells. And so these are all considerations of heat. Well, an individual could have all of these manifestations without ever expressing to the point of becoming a diagnosable condition in conventional medical systems. And in which case, herbal medicine is actually oftentimes a better course of action. So the way I construct this is that herbal medicine and these types of natural products are more conservative forms of care, generally speaking, especially when you look at the risk to benefit ratios. Notwithstanding certain diseases which require pharmaceutical care. So what we're looking at now is a widened range of options. And part of what happened here in the U.S., of course, is the range of options that were inclusive of botanical agents were essentially eliminated from the system back in the 1920s.
Well, I want you to hold that thought, because we can talk about that when we come back after the break, how that process happened and what it means for us today, because I think there's a lot more for us to talk about on health, healing, astrology, and all the complementary medicines, because that's what the conversation started by Culpeper continues to ring through history till today. So with that, we need to take a little bit of break. I hope all of you will come back and listen to the rest of the conversation. And until then, enjoy the music. So we're talking during the break and thought maybe a good way to talk about this for the second half of the show is from the perspective of someone who is seeking health care. So, Lisa, if someone's coming to you as an astrologer and an herbalist, where do you start?
Well, oftentimes I find out, like, usually what kind of condition that they'll have, because often they're already knowing that they have, like, for instance, a urinary tract infection, or that they have a liver condition, or something like that. It could even be as simple as a headache, okay? Part of knowing how to handle that on an herbal level is to understand a better underlying problem of what really is happening. For instance, with headaches, we're taught in our society, headache, go get pill, go make pain go away. It doesn't really solve the underlying problem of where the headache came from. So I find that the planetary energies of that person is a really great way in order to access what herbal medicine they likely need, because then I can get into, like, for instance, if they have more of a hormonal issue for that's starting the headache versus if they have a constipation issue where they just, basically need the colon help, that can solve a headache. They might have a head injury, which would require completely different treatment. These are types of things that, like, an herbalist would kind of go, okay, well, it's not just one herb fits all. And it's not just one herb fits all people. And our astrological signature, because we're all originated from the stars, we want to be balanced in those expressions. And tasting the herbs when they are assigned a planetary ruler, like Nicholas Culpeper had this amazing system of doing, tends to help us balance our bodies, and then the body then heals. It becomes in a good state of health, not just suppressing the pain symptom, but actually correcting the underlying problem, the underlying imbalance, if that helps.
Well, it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, as I was telling both of you all between the break, I think you have some very, since I've personally been treated by both of you, in various healthcare realms, that you have some similar ways of approaching it. Will, you brought this up that in traditional Hindu medicine and Chinese medicine, there's some similarities.
Right. It could be argued that early Greek medicine, Unani, which was the Persian, they essentially took the Greek and made it their own. Shared communication through the trade routes, possibly earlier than the Silk Road. These ideas going on between China, India, Greece, and what happened is that in contemporary scientific medicine, there's a tendency to divest of that which is of the past, and that which cannot be proven by measurable instruments which conduct measurement. In other words, the ability to quantify data. So we lost the ability to use qualitative information to a certain extent and to employ a larger body of signs in the practice of medicine, which combines signs and symptoms in clinical practice. So the signs are now limited to be things that the physician observes during the course of practice, and the symptoms are now the report of the experience of the patient that they're having. And but earlier in history, in Tibetan medicine, the aggregate of signs are inclusive of events that are taking place in the environment, and this was true in all these early cultures. And I think that some baby has been thrown out in some bathwater somewhere here. Because as far as I can tell, there's still value in this. And how do we know this? Because these practices are gaining presence through licensure, through accredited education processes, and through collaborative medical processes. We're seeing this type of thinking reemerge in very significant ways. And,
like what?
For instance, the inclusion of Chinese medicine in programs at UCLA, or the inclusion of those practices within hospital systems in Seattle, Boston, Los Angeles, Texas. Yeah.
So you're saying that people like you and Lisa might be guest speakers at medical schools to talk about a different way of viewing health and healing as about finding internal balance rather than just fixing the broken stuff.
Well, yes, I've spoken at UCLA and other medical schools in Southern California. But let me tell you this: I don't speak on medical astrology. The only time I remember speaking about that in medical situations is usually as a historical experiment. Now, when I'm teaching an East-West medical history course, and I pull these methods out and demonstrate them, it is often rather uncanny how well the astrological assessment will fit with conventional Chinese medical assessment.
Mm-hmm. And when we say astrological, you're really talking about one of those environmental things that you're looking at, that it's not just what's happening in the personal experience, it's what's happening in their social environment as well as up in the sky, that in some way we are a balance that's larger than just the space between our ears and the rest of us. Is that what you're saying? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's to an extent. Well, actually, yes, this is true. This is the view of holism, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about here. Notwithstanding the fact that Nicholas Culpeper had some very specific methods that he used to arrive at his medical conclusions, they oftentimes gained him a more comprehensive position diagnostically than conventional docs of the era, who may have just used a sample of urine from a patient and speculated based upon their observations of that urine without having ever seen the patient.
Wow. Now, Lisa, you were telling us also during the break about some other techniques that you use in addition to someone's astrological signature to help diagnose and treat some people who see you. What are some of those?
Okay, well, if I personally know them, And I know what they look like, and the body types and that type of thing. I use that. Sometimes I'll use things that I know that are happening, like what you were talking about, like timing of things. For instance, I know that if Venus is conjunct Mars, sometimes there'll be more probability of someone having like a urinary tract infection, okay, because Mars resonating with inflammation and Venus resonating with the kidney and that system. There could be interruption there. So I'll also think about like where the planets are at the time of the question. I do a lot of my work via distance. So a lot of times I'm using a very natural talent with me, and that would be called dowsing. And I usually use a pendulum for that. And I tend to get dosages and what herbs to put together and just kind of match up the whole thing. And they usually get their own herbs at the stores or where have you. That most of my clients are in California, so I will do it that way. I'll be actually back in California soon. So it kind of depends, because I realize that most of the time people practice herbalism with people in person, and it just so happens that I do a lot of mine, like 90% of mine are distance. So I have to have other methods of doing that, and astrology is only one of the methods that I'll use. I use a combination.
And will you also practice acupuncture? And
yes.
If I recall correctly, music.
That's correct. And there's correlations between all these practices, yes.
Well, I do energy healing too, actually. So that's probably a large part of what I end up doing. And then the herbs end up supporting it on the physical level.
Right. So yeah, the basis of my practice is Chinese medicine, which includes acupuncture. But bring it back to Culpeper, which make the distinction here, because he had great disdain for these physicians who would just use a urine pot to make a diagnosis and would speculate based on whatever the person who carried that pot to them told them about the patient, or the patient told them about themselves, and kind of reconstitute it. And whereas Culpeper's emphasis was on what was called a decumbiture chart, which is a chart that's constructed for the moment that the person falls ill, and which is what that word means, to calculate a chart for that moment. He felt had far more significance and provided much more significant information about the person's constitution, the condition that they were experiencing, and the likelihood that his intervention would help. He used it as much for prognosticating and determining how much he could help as he did for determining what he was going to do.
So, to the moment of falling ill, this brings back the question to the people who might be in the audience: how would people know that they might benefit from the kind of work that you do, vis-a-vis going to your general practitioner or the emergency room? How do you help people with that decision?
Well, I think ultimately that decision belongs with the person, and especially once they've experienced this form of care. You see the bounds between conventional and these forms of care are blurring constantly, and that question has been researched in China rather extensively. Not well here in the West, because there's still fairly powerful systems of closure between conventional and less conventional forms of care. I think one might do is look towards specialty classes of these forms of care, because China and India have both sustained this professional discipline and style of practice with a written record and history of practice for more than 2,000 years. And so we have an extensive log of case studies for more than 2,000 years. That's an extraordinary body of evidence for these forms of practice. But where are the specializations? They're in dermatology, women's health. They're in ophthalmology, interestingly enough, and then also neurology. And neurology, particularly in the areas of stroke and so forth. In my current patient population, there are folks who come with anxiety and depression or pain. Of course, people know acupuncture for pain, and it's common, but also in the areas of oncology, supporting patients through their forms of conventional care. And when abandoned by those systems, there's still a great deal of comfort that can be achieved in palliative forms of care.
So oftentimes you may be helping someone who is undergoing a conventional medical therapy, and this is looking at the issue from a different perspective that's complementary.
That's right. We're talking integrative medicine, essentially. So no matter whether they're dealing with autoimmune disorders or there's a range of efficacy which can be achieved through chemical and surgical means, and there's a range of efficacy that can be achieved in physiological manipulations such as acupuncture and or the use of softer, rounder types of herbal components that deal with concepts that are not dealt with in conventional medicine very well at all, which is boosting the vital life force, nourishing and supplementing the blood, cleansing the blood. And herbs are particularly also effective for relaxing the nervous system, opening up the circulatory system. So all of these kind of strategies can be applied for a whole host of conditions.
And to see astrology as one of the tools in this process, I think is something that really has been lost, at least in traditional medical circles for several hundred years. But it's still present in the kind of work that you do.
Absolutely. I would also say that many people go to conventional medicine first rather than seeing an herbalist or something that is less harming to the body. And so, and I'm sure Will can attest to this, we're often kind of unwinding some of the ills that were done by conventional medicine because it is not created for chronic conditions. And that is mostly what people end up coming to me. But I'm a last resort because I'm not covered by insurance, and, you know, the media and everything else demonizes us. So that's kind of a frustrating aspect. But the vitality can be brought back pretty quickly if you can, you know, where if you look at taking the conventional medicine as like the clutch and then the herbal medicine as the gas on the car, and like, you know how that kind of, you know, slow taking out of the clutch and then the slow putting on the gas. That's kind of how I look at doing that. And I've had some actually recent good success with a person that I'm working with right now that turned out with a acquired form of hemophilia that starts with a T, and it's really long and I can't even pronounce it. And it was not something I learned about in medical school, but yet when I learned that it was an autoimmune disorder that was where the body was destroying itself, I kind of already knew energetically what was happening. We came up with a formula which in her case that matched her was mullein, ashwagandha, and astragalus. She has had a miracle with her doctor about building her blood platelet level from almost dead to at least vital in a very short time, and it surprised the physician. So there can be miracles with herbs that are just not really prevalent and known about.
And I think what's another thing that's fascinating about what you do is that many people that I know who are massage therapists or acupuncturists may not even think of astrology as something that fits into the mix. I remember talking to one person here in Austin that set up a holistic medicine meetup, and I said, "Great, I'll be there." And she said, "Why? You're an astrologer, and we have healers." And to me, that just meant that for people who are studying astrology, that we don't necessarily talk to the alternative medicine community the way people like you who are walking in several different places, crossing boundaries, do.
Yeah. Well, and I started with astrology and crossed into those boundaries later only because of my own healing issues. Mm-hmm. So I guess I came at it from that way, and I do know people that have reversed that, where they learned healing arts and then came to astrology later. But the healing art folks, yes, I guess that somebody didn't give them the memo that all of the ancient healers of all cultures in old times, and some cultures still currently, need to learn their form of astrology that matches their medicine system. And we have one in Western medicine. And Nicholas Culpeper was quite the advocate for that.
Well, I want to thank you both. I have learned so much tonight. We are drawing to a close for the hour. Is there anything else you think that our audience, who is not astrologers, may want to know about astrology, medicine, and the possibilities?
Well, there are tremendous possibilities, I think. And it comes from essentially taking on a different perspective and a different point of view. And this is where the great strength is. Sometimes if where we're looking isn't providing the answer and the solution, we need to look a different way or somewhere else.
Indeed. That was well put, Will. Yeah, because we do need that viewpoint, that lens, and it's so surprising to me that even Donna with alternative healers, that they didn't understand that astrology was a core part of understanding healing in the ancient times.
Gets back to what you said about the idea of holism and looking at the whole organism.
Absolutely.
Including its ecological and divinely ecological and cosmically ecological environments.
Oh, yes. Plants, planets. Yes.
That's right.
We're all about that plants and planets.
Plants and planets.
Well, we are running out of time for tonight, so I want you both to tell people who are listening how they can find you. I'll nominate one of you.
Okay. This is Lisa Allen. I'm at astroherbalist.com, ASTRO, herbalist.com. And I look forward to anyone just inquiring, checking out some of my weird articles, like even herbal contraception. That happens to be my most popular post, actually.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Donna, for having us both on your show.
Yeah.
It's my pleasure.
Excellent.
Will, how can we find you?
Okay. Anyone could just Google Will Morris, acupuncturist, and you'll find me. You can even add Austin, and that'll even locate it even better. I'm also a columnist on Acupuncture Today, and you can look at some of my thoughts and thinking there. But if you Google Will Morris acupuncture, you'll pull down all kinds of articles and debates and so forth, and that's probably the best way.
You can tell these are my laid-back friends. We're all good. All right.
Yes, we're the laid-back ones.
That's right.
Everyone should read Nicholas Culpeper's English Physician. It's a free ebook online. I just love the internet.
That's right.
We can read all of these things just through our computer screen. It's just awesome.
Okay, we gotta go. So come back next week to the Dead Astrologer Society. Find us on Facebook at Dead Astrologer Society. I'm Donna Woodwell. See y'all next week.